Welcome to the Hindu Daily. All right, let's dive right in. The first major theme we're tracking as we move through 2026 is this really central paradox coming out of Beijing.
It's a fascinating contradiction, really.
Because on the one hand, you have all this news, all these reports about their internal economic struggles. I mean, you see it everywhere.
Oh, absolutely. The property sector is still in a state of collapse. Domestic consumption is weak. The fundamentals are shaky.
But then you look at their external posture, their foreign policy, and it's projecting this immense strategic confidence.
Complete confidence. Some reports even frame it as bordering on, well, hubris.
So how is the leadership managing that? That incredible split between internal reality and external projection.
Well, it's a very deliberate dual approach from President Xi's leadership. Domestically, the strategy is to tighten political control. We're talking more ideological discipline, an emphasis on loyalty.
We've seen that with the sacking of generals and other officials, right?
Yeah, exactly. It sends a clear message that loyalty is the absolute paramount virtue. But then, on the global stage, they take that internal consolidation and translate it into diplomatic expansion.
So they're building out their institutional reach.
Precisely. They're cementing their position as a leader of the global south through things like the AIIB, the New Development Bank, and the expansion of BRICS and the SKO. They're using domestic control as a springboard for global influence.
And there's been a real mood shift in Beijing's strategic circles over the past year.
A huge one. If you go back to, say, late 2024, the talk was all about anxiety. Anxiety over U.S. containment, over the economic slowdown.
But by mid-2025, that completely changed.
It transformed into this sense of regained momentum. The feeling was that they'd secured some tactical advantages in the great power competition and had managed de-escalation with the U.S. largely on their own terms.
Which is remarkable given, as you said, the fragile economic reality just beneath the surface.
It really is. The official growth figure for 2025 was around 5%, but that number hides some deep structural weaknesses.
Such as the deflationary pressure.
That's the big one. Producer prices have been in negative territory for 38 consecutive months. That's over 3 years of persistent deflation, which just crushes investment and business confidence.
And instead of tackling that by, boosting the average consumer, Beijing has doubled down on its state-led model.
They've reinforced it. The entire focus, as laid out in the new 15th five-year plan, is on technological self-reliance. It's all about semiconductors, AI, green energy, and advanced manufacturing.
But that inward focus creates another paradox, doesn't it? It actually makes them more dependent on the outside world.
It's the core irony. To compensate for that weak domestic demand, they have to export on a massive scale. The trade surplus in just the first 11 months of 2025 was over $1 trillion.
And that's what's being called the China Shock 2.0.
Yes, because they are flooding global markets with subsidized high-tech goods. Think electric vehicles, solar panels. It undercuts competitors everywhere and creates huge disruptions.
So for a country like India, the immediate impact of that is a soaring trade deficit.
It's a massive problem. The deficit is expected to exceed $110 billion in 2025. But it's more than just the number. It's about vulnerability.
In what way?
China's scale gives it control over critical supply chains. We're talking rare earth magnets, pharmaceutical precursors. It creates this incredible economic leverage point that Beijing can use.
And this is all happening against the backdrop of recalibrated U.S.-China relations under President Trump's second term.
A critical piece of the puzzle. The 2025 U.S. national security strategy reframed China. It's no longer a systemic rival, but primarily an economic competitor.
A subtle but very significant change in language.
It is. And that shift, combined with the perception that the U.S. is prioritizing the Western Hemisphere over the Indo-Pacific, really squeezes the strategic space for countries like India.
So the Trump-Xi meeting in Busan, that wasn't a grand reset.
Not at all. It was purely transactional, some modest tariff adjustments and easing of some export controls. But the perception it created, this idea of a G2 overlay on global affairs, is what matters.
Because even a little bit of U.S.-China accommodation limits everyone else's choices.
It immediately constrains their room to maneuver. And this brings us right to the India-China relationship itself.
Which has seen, what, a cautious stabilization?
Cautious stabilization, yes, but no substantive progress on the big structural issues. The border is stable, but as the saying goes, it is definitely not normal.
And the real danger is in these gray zone tactics.
The salami slicing, as it's sometimes called, these buffer zones that have been created effectively restrict India's patrolling rights and access for local grazers.
And the risk is that these temporary zones become permanent.
That is the fear. It's an attempt to achieve incremental, permanent territorial gains without firing a shot. And Beijing keeps sending other negative signals,
Like,
like the joint military exercises with Pakistan, Operation Sindoor, or the massive hydropower projects in Tibet that affect water flows downstream, or denying India access to critical rare earth magnets, and of course the repeated territorial claims over Arunachal Pradesh.
so India's strategy is focused on managing risk while building up deterrence.
It's a calibrated engagement, but Beijing's message is quite clear. They're going to persist with this incremental assertiveness on what they see as their core interests.
Okay, let's pivot now from those external challenges to a major internal security success story for India. We're talking about the significant curbing of Maoism.
It really is a dramatic turnaround. The data is striking. Violent incidents are down nearly 90% from their peak in 2010.
And the geographical spread has shrunk enormously.
It's plummeted from 126 affected districts down to just 11 nationally by October 2025. And really, the core of the problem is now concentrated in just 3 districts in South Bastar.
Bijapur, Narayanpur, and Sukma.
That's right. It's a huge achievement when you consider the history.
Let's talk about that. Why did the Dandakaranya region become such a hub for the Maoists back in the 80s?
It was almost the perfect environment for an insurgency. You had this remote, rugged, forested terrain that spanned several states, which made it easy for them to move around.
And there was a profound governance deficit.
That was the crucial factor. The tribal inhabitants were marginalized, official policy kept them in these exclusive belts, and they had no access to basic services or protection from exploitation. Decades of neglect created a vacuum that the Maoists were able to fill with their own parallel government.
So what was the big strategic shift? What was the game changer that finally started to reverse this?
It was the decision to establish security camps deep inside these remote, previously Maoist-dominated areas.
Which must have been met with resistance at first.
There was some initial resistance from locals, which is understandable, but that faded once they started seeing the tangible benefits. The camps weren't just about security, they were an anchor for the state's presence.
And the advantages were multifaceted.
Exactly. It wasn't just about troop numbers. First, it boosted the police-to-population ratio, which acted as a deterrent. Second, the reaction time for security forces was cut dramatically, putting the Maoists on the defensive.
And it had a psychological impact.
A major one. It sent a message to the locals that the government was there to stay and was in control of their welfare. And critically, it improved human intelligence, which is a zero-sum game in this kind of conflict.
The security presence then enabled the civil administration to move in, which is the key to any long-term peace.
That's the critical piece. The camps became hubs for development. Roads got built, mobile towers went up. Suddenly, it's not just the police showing up. It's the district collector, the tehsildar, the revenue official. Real governance was finally reaching these areas.
And that has eroded the Maoists' appeal.
It's waned dramatically. Their recruitment, funding, and weapon acquisition have all diminished. We're seeing large numbers of cadres surrendering or being neutralized.
But the work isn't finished. The next phase is about addressing the root causes, the structural issues.
Absolutely. As the local population comes out of seclusion, these rights-based issues will come to the forefront. You have to robustly implement constitutional guarantees like the PISA Act, which gives village councils power over resources, and the Forest Rights Act.
Which is a huge undertaking in areas with little to no previous administrative records.
It's a massive challenge. It requires complex mapping of land titles and forest rights. That's why the proposal is for a dedicated task force with a long-term plan.
A plan reaching all the way to 2047, aligning with the Viksit Bharat vision.
Precisely. The idea is to match the security success with a decades-long governance and development plan. The security forces have done the heavy lifting. Now it's up to the civil administration to build a sustainable peace on that foundation.
All right, a complete shift of gears now. Let's move to the opinion section and talk about a kind of labor that underpins everything but has, for centuries, gone almost entirely unseen.
Unseen and unvalued. You can trace this back for hundreds of years. The article references a 1739 poem by Mary Collier, The Woman's Labor.
And what's the point she was making back then?
That women worked just as hard as men in the fields, doing the same physical labor, but their work was still considered secondary. It was never rewarded in the same way.
And that historical context flows right into the data we see today.
It does. A 2023 UN report found that, globally, women spend 2.8 more hours than men every single day on unpaid care and domestic work.
But the argument in this piece goes beyond just, cooking and cleaning. It focuses on the invisible burden.
Yes, the emotional and mental labor. This is the cognitive load, the planning, the scheduling, the relationship maintenance, the worrying that's required to keep a household and a family functioning smoothly. It's almost never measured and certainly never rewarded.
Professor Sharon Rai has a very powerful way of describing this.
She argues that people who perform this everyday maintenance work are constantly told that their everyday labor do not count in metals production. Our entire economic system is set up to ignore it.
So what are the deeper structural forces that make this labor invisible? It's more than just individual bias, right?
It's entirely systemic. Our economic and policy priorities are built around what is seen as productive labor, which has traditionally been the domain of men. There's a relentless focus on GDP growth, which, by definition, doesn't count unpaid work.
And an emphasis on physical infrastructure over social infrastructure.
That's a key point. We prioritize roads and power plants over things like affordable, high-quality childcare, elder care, and mental health services.
Which are domains where women do a disproportionate amount of the work, paid and unpaid.
Exactly. By failing to invest in social infrastructure publicly, the state implicitly reinforces the idea that this is a private burden to be shouldered by women for free. As the scholar Antonella Picchio argued, biology was historically used to obscure this social division of labor, deeming women's work non-productive.
But there are some scattered efforts around the world to try and give this work some kind of institutional recognition.
There are. Bolivia's constitution, for instance, actually recognizes homework as an economic activity that creates value, and it grants housewives Social Security.
That's quite radical.
It is. And in Trinidad and Tobago, a 1996 law requires the statistical measurement and monetary valuation of unremunerated work broken down by gender. The first step is just to make it visible in the data.
Argentina has a system that gives pension credits.
Right. They enacted a law that allows women to receive pension credits for the unpaid care work they did raising children. It's a retrospective acknowledgement that this work had economic value and contributed to the country.
And what about in India? Is there any movement on this front?
There's no legal framework for direct compensation yet, but the courts are starting to weigh in. There was a landmark ruling from the Madras High Court in 2023.
The Connie and Naidu case.
Yes. The court ruled that a wife who performs household duties contributes indirectly but substantially to the acquisition of family assets. Therefore, she was entitled to an equal share in the property. It's a huge step.
It indirectly assigns an economic value to her labor.
Precisely. It moves away from the idea that this is simply a duty and frames it as a contribution.
But just recognizing it financially isn't the whole solution, is it?
It's a necessary first step, but it's not sufficient. Recognition has to be paired with a real structural reconfiguration of gendered social relations.
Meaning men have to do more of it.
Men have to actively co-shoulder these care responsibilities. Otherwise, the burden remains feminized. And what happens is that you get this tiered system where marginalized women are then paid very little to sustain the reproductive labor for households where more dominant women have entered the formal workforce. The underlying inequality remains.
Okay, let's turn to the science section. There's a discovery here that really challenges one of the fundamental rules of biology. The universal genetic code.
It's essentially like finding a new rule in the dictionary that all life uses to build proteins from DNA.
So the classic model, we have 64 total codons, right? These three-letter words in our DNA.
Correct. And of those 64, for decades, we thought 61 were sense codons that code for the 20 common amino acids that make up proteins. The other 3 were stop codons.
Their only job is to tell the cellular machinery, okay, the protein is finished, stop here.
Exactly. But this new study, published in the journal Science, finds a radical exception in a group of microbes called archaea.
And this centers on one specific codon, tag.
Yes. In almost every organism on Earth, from bacteria to humans, tag means stop. But in some archaea, it was known that tag could sometimes code for a rare 21st amino acid called pyrrolysine, or pyle.
We knew about other rare exceptions, though.
We did. For example, the codon TGA sometimes codes for selenocysteine in humans. But this discovery is different. It's more fundamental.
How so? What makes this more than just another oddity?
Previously, scientists thought that even in these archaea, tag mostly acted as a stop signal. This new study looked at specific species, like one from an Antarctic lake and another from the human gut, and found they have completely repurposed the tag codon.
So it's not ambiguous anymore.
Not at all. In these organisms, tag always means insert pyrrolysine. It never means stop. They have a unique set of molecular machinery, a special tRNA, and an enzyme that ensures this happens every single time.
So they've effectively edited their own genetic dictionary on a genome-wide scale.
That's a perfect way to put it. This led the researchers to propose that this is a previously unrecognized genetic code, which they've called the pile code.
And in this new dictionary, the numbers are different.
Right. Instead of 61 sense codons for 20 amino acids, this code has 62 sense codons for 21 amino acids. It's a fundamental change to the accounting of life's building blocks.
What are the immediate implications for researchers?
Well, for one, if you're studying these archaea, you have to use the new pile code to predict their proteins. If you use the standard code, your software will see a tag codon and mistakenly think the protein ends there, giving you an incorrect, truncated sequence.
And these pile-containing proteins are important for the organism.
Very. They found them involved in essential functions like DNA replication and energy production. This isn't just a trivial addition.
The article also points to massive potential for biotechnology.
This is where it gets really exciting. The researchers were able to take the genetic machinery for this pile code from the archaea and successfully transfer it into E. coli, which is the workhorse bacterium of biotech labs.
So they essentially taught E. coli how to read this new genetic word.
They did. They designed a gene in E. coli with a tag codon in the middle of it. Normally, this would just produce a short, useless protein fragment.
But with the new archaeal machinery.
The E. coli read tag not as stop, but as insert pile, and produced the complete full-length protein.
That's incredible. It proves you can use this system to bioengineer new proteins.
Exactly. It gives scientists a tool to place this unique 21st amino acid at any desired position in a protein. This could create proteins with novel functional advantages that you can't get from the standard 20 amino acids, opening up new possibilities for drugs, materials, and industrial enzymes.
Let's shift now to geopolitics and the text and context section, starting with a really dramatic event from the beginning of the year, the capture of Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro.
Yes, on January 3rd. He was apprehended and transported to the U.S. to face some very serious charges: drug trafficking and narcoterrorism.
And this operation seems to be the result of two very different, almost conflicting policy impulses within the Trump administration.
They really are two distinct streams of thought. On one side, you have the Republican hawks.
People like Secretary Rubio.
Exactly. For them, this is about ideology. They have long wanted regime change in Caracas to remove the socialist government. It's also a domestic political play, appealing to conservative Hispanic voters, especially in Florida.
But then you have the other impulse, which is the core America First idea of avoiding foreign wars and nation building. How do they square that circle?
They square it by reframing the entire intervention. The administration's argument is that this isn't a war. They claim the Venezuelan government is essentially a narco-terrorist organization that is actively harming Americans through drug trafficking.
So it's framed as a law enforcement action.
Precisely. A counterterrorism and counter-narcotics operation, not a war of choice, is a way to justify the action while sticking to the no more foreign entanglements rhetoric.
But that raises the central question for everyone watching.
Yeah.
Will removing the man at the top actually lead to durable regime change?
History would suggest it's highly unlikely. Dictating the political future of another country with military force alone is incredibly difficult. Just look at Libya in 2011. Removing Gaddafi led to state collapse and chaos.
And in Venezuela, the state apparatus is still there.
It is. Maduro is gone, but the entire governmental and military structure built up over decades by him and Chavez is largely intact. Power will almost certainly just pass to another senior figure within the regime.
What about the U.S. hope for a popular uprising against the government?
That's often more wishful thinking than strategy. The historical precedent is that when a foreign power intervenes militarily, the local population tends to rally around the flag against the external aggressor, not turn on its own leadership.
And there are real risks that chaos in Venezuela could actively harm U.S. interests.
The unintended consequences could be severe. Instability could trigger a new wave of refugees heading for the U.S. southern border, which is already a major political crisis. And a failed state is a better, not worse, environment for drug traffickers to operate in.
So if the goal is a stable, pro-American government, that would seem to require the very thing President Trump has always railed against: nation building.
It would. It requires ground troops, long-term commitment, massive investment. Everything he has portrayed as a waste of American blood and treasure in places like Iraq and Afghanistan.
That's the core contradiction.
It is. Mr. Trump's style is to go for the flashy, quick win. So he may well tout Maduro's capture as a victory and move on, but he's under immense pressure from the hawks in his party and his voter base to see this through to wholesale regime change.
And how he navigates that pressure will determine what happens next.
It will determine whether this becomes a long, costly, and complex U.S. involvement in Venezuela, something he has always pledged to avoid.
Staying in the text and context section, let's turn to Pakistan. The historical dynamic of military dominance there seems to have reached a new peak in late 2025.
It's being called the silent coup of December 4th, and that's a pretty apt description.
This is the appointment of Field Marshal Asim Munir.
Yes, he was appointed as the country's first ever Chief of Defense Force, the CDF, while also keeping his job as the Chief of Army Staff, the COAS. It's an unprecedented centralization of power.
And this wasn't done with tanks in the streets. It was done through a constitutional amendment.
The 27th Amendment. It grants him huge authority, including legal immunity and severely limited judicial oversight of military matters. It codifies the military's power in law.
But as the article notes, this is just the latest chapter in a very long story. Pakistan's early years were incredibly unstable.
They were 7 prime ministers in just 11 years. This was fueled by deep ethnic and linguistic divides, particularly the conflict over Urdu versus Bangla.
And that instability created the opening for the first military takeover.
In 1958, General Ayub Khan imposed martial law, justifying it by saying the army had to step in and save the country from corrupt politicians. He later made himself a field marshal, despite not winning a major war.
His failure in the 1965 war made him vulnerable, and power passed to another general, Yahya Khan,
who then presided over the 1970 elections, which ended in a national catastrophe.
because the military elite in West Pakistan refused to accept the democratic result.
They couldn't accept that Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from the east had won a majority. They launched a brutal crackdown, which led to the 1971 war with India and the creation of Bangladesh. It was a devastating blow to Pakistan's identity and the military's prestige.
Then came the long shadow of General Zia-ul Haq.
He seized power in 1977, executed Zulfikar Ali Bhutto, and fundamentally altered the country. He promoted a hardline jihadist ideology, tightened blasphemy laws, and his rule was funded by foreign aid for the Afghan jihad against the Soviets. He also institutionalized the use of terrorism in Kashmir.
So even after his death, his legacy deeply entrenched the military's role in the state.
Deeply. The 1990s saw this revolving door of civilian governments under Benazir Bhutto and Nawaz Sharif, with the army establishment constantly clipping their wings whenever they tried to assert real authority.
And that dynamic led directly to the 1999 Kargil conflict.
Yes, General Pervez Musharraf launched that operation in secret, while Prime Minister Sharif was trying to make peace with India. The breakdown in trust led directly to Musharraf's coup later that year, where he ruled as chief executive.
The most recent example of this pattern is the rise and fall of Imran Khan.
It's the perfect illustration. He was seen as the army's choice in 2018. But the moment he tried to assert his own authority, particularly over key military appointments, he was maneuvered out of power with a no-confidence vote.
So his immense public popularity wasn't enough to save him.
It shows that popular support alone is no guarantee of political survival in Pakistan. The military remains the ultimate arbiter of power.
Why does this cycle just keep repeating?
Because since the country's birth, civilian institutions have been chronically weak. You had the early loss of Jinnah, the deep ethnic divides, corruption. It created a power vacuum that the military, as the most cohesive and organized institution, has consistently filled. General Munir's rise is just the next, more formalized chapter.
Let's move to the foreign section and return to Venezuela, this time looking at the geopolitics of its oil reserves.
Right. So following Maduro's capture, the Trump administration announced plans to revitalize the industry with U.S. companies. But the first thing to note is that this won't have an immediate impact on oil prices.
So, no relief at the gas pump anytime soon. Why not?
2 main reasons. First, the global market has a surplus right now, and Venezuela's current very low output is already factored in. Second, and more importantly, their oil industry is in a catastrophic state of disrepair.
Years of neglect and sanctions.
Exactly. We're talking broken infrastructure, a lack of skilled workers.
Yeah.
It will take years and billions of dollars to fix.
But the long-term prize is enormous.
It's monumental. Venezuela has the world's largest proven crude oil reserves, about 17% of the global total. If they can get production back up, it could fundamentally alter the global energy market for decades.
Production plummeted from 3.5 million barrels a day
Yeah.
in 1999. What caused that collapse?
It was almost entirely political. Hugo Chavez nationalized the industry in 2007, kicking out major international companies. So the problem isn't finding the oil, it's creating the political stability and legal certainty to attract the massive foreign investment needed to get it out of the ground.
And how much investment are we talking about?
To get back to pre-Chavez levels of around 4 million barrels a day, experts estimate it would take about a decade and somewhere around $100 billion.
There's also a specific quality to Venezuelan oil that makes it particularly valuable right now.
Yes, it's a heavy crude oil. This type is essential for making products like diesel and asphalt, which are in short supply globally, partly because of sanctions on Russia and Venezuela itself.
And U.S. refineries are specifically designed to process it.
The U.S. Gulf Coast refineries are optimized for this exact type of heavy crude. Getting it back on the market would make them much more efficient and could lower costs significantly.
And that brings us to the bigger geopolitical game here.
Yeah.
Pressuring Russia.
That's the strategic angle. If Venezuela starts pumping more heavy crude and producing more diesel, it gives Europe and the rest of the world an alternative to Russian oil. It directly undermines a key revenue stream for a major U.S. competitor.
Finally, there's a tricky legal question about who controls and profits from this oil in the interim.
Columbia law professor Matthew Waxman points this out. Under international law, an occupying military power can't just enrich itself by selling off another country's resources.
So how might the U.S. try to get around that?
The argument they might try to make is that the Maduro regime never rightfully owned the oil in the first place, and therefore they can monetize it. But it's a very contentious legal argument that depends heavily on who the international community recognizes as Venezuela's legitimate government.
For our spotlight section, let's go to the ground in India, to Murshidabad in West Bengal, a district facing a severe child marriage crisis.
The numbers are really staggering. The latest National Family Health Survey found that over 55% of women aged 20 to 24 in the district were married before they turned 18. That's one of the highest rates in the country.
But in the face of this, the source highlights these incredible young activists, the Kanya Shri Yodas, or girl warriors.
They are students who are on the front lines of this fight. The story of Manisha Khatun, who's in 11th grade, is amazing. She used the 1098 Child Helpline to stop 6 child marriages in 2025.
Including 2 of her own classmates. That takes incredible bravery, especially with the social backlash she must face.
It does, and then you have the story of Musumi Khatun, who had to fight her own family when they tried to marry her off at 17. She threatened to go to the police herself. It just shows the intense personal pressure these girls are under.
The article points to some very deep-seated gender roles that are driving this.
Yes, workshops held in the community revealed these entrenched ideas: boys ride a bike, girls cook. And one male student even said he wouldn't want his future wife to work because if she has money, then she will give me attitude.
So it's about control. A fear of female financial independence.
That's a huge, often unspoken driver of early marriage. It's a way to maintain patriarchal control.
But despite that, there are pockets of real success from administrative efforts.
7 gram panchayats have been declared child marriage free. And the key to their success has been a comprehensive approach involving schools, community leaders, and even religious institutions, with announcements against the practice being made in mosques.
There's also a major health dimension to this.
Teenage pregnancies are a direct and dangerous consequence. At one point, the rate was as high as 21% in the district. An aggressive campaign brought it down to 17% in some areas. But early pregnancy leads to severe health complications for both the mother and the child.
The administration is using a 2-pronged approach of prevention and prosecution.
Right. They prevented over 1,000 child marriages in the second half of 2025.
Yeah.
But they also backed that up with over 100 police reports under the Child Marriage Act and even more under the POCSO Act for sexual offenses.
But there's a debate about how effective prosecution is.
Yes, social workers are torn. On the one hand, booking the parents, the priests, even the caterers sends a strong deterrent message. But on the other hand, if the minor girl is sent to a state-run home, the infrastructure is often poor, which just complicates her life further. The focus is slowly shifting towards prevention and shared community responsibility.
But officials say drastic steps are still necessary.
They are still booking everyone involved in the chain to send a clear signal. And they're also dealing with the rise in elopement cases, fueled by access to mobile phones, which highlights a new challenge and the need for more school counselors.
The resilience of these young women, like Nupur Biswas, who's studying for a nursing degree, is just incredible.
Her story is amazing, and her notebook, with math formulas next to the question hopeless end or endless hope, really captures the spirit of this fight. This local battle is so important because it ties directly into India's commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goal of ending child marriage by 2030.
For our final deep dive today, another spotlight. This one on the silent and heartbreaking burden of Huntington's disease in India.
It's a rare hereditary neurodegenerative condition, and the story of Mahalakshmi from Andhra Pradesh is just devastating. She's a daily wage laborer supporting 8 family members while battling the disease herself.
And the disease has torn through her family.
It's a relentless progression. She's lost her husband, 2 of her siblings-in-law, and her son, Jagadish, who had the juvenile form of the disease. Now she's caring for her daughter, Rani, who also has it and can barely walk or talk.
And the hereditary risk in her family was especially high.
Yes. Huntington's is an autosomal dominant disease, so there's a 50% risk for a child if one parent has it. But that risk jumps to 75% in cases of consanguineous marriage, marrying a close relative. Mahalakshmi married her maternal uncle, which helps explain the tragic concentration of the disease in her family.
The financial toll is crushing her.
She's already 15 lakh rupees in debt just to cover basic medical costs for her daughter.
The article highlights that while the disease is globally recognized, there's a huge diagnosis and policy gap in India.
A critical one. It's significantly underdiagnosed due to a lack of awareness. But the core systemic failure is that Huntington's disease is not included in the Union government's national policy for rare diseases.
The NPRD 2021 list. And what is the direct consequence of that exclusion?
The consequence is financial catastrophe for these families. Because it's not on the list, patients are denied access to financial aid of up to 50 lakh rupees that is available under the Pradhan Mantri Jan Arogya Yojana health insurance scheme.
So they are completely on their own.
Completely. It forces families into crippling debt just to travel for treatment. One family travels 1,200 kilometers to Nimeham in Bengaluru, spending thousands on each visit, which is just unsustainable.
And beyond the financial cost, the emotional and physical toll on caregivers is unimaginable.
It's extreme. The Huntington's Disease Society of India, or HDSI, tells the story of a co-founder who died by suicide after 25 years of caregiving. It's a life of constant fear and physical and mental exhaustion.
Mahalakshmi's son, Jagadish, left behind a vital legacy, though.
His resilience was inspiring, but his mother's decision to donate his brain for research was a landmark moment. It was the first juvenile HD brain donation in India, and it is absolutely crucial for scientists trying to understand and find a cure for this disease.
The article lists a number of acute infrastructure deficiencies that need to be addressed.
The list is long. There's no national patient database. There are no government neuroscience centers in Andhra Pradesh, forcing that long travel to Bengaluru. There are no specifically trained nurses or paramedical staff. And there's a desperate need for genetic counseling centers.
So the HTSI's main policy recommendation is to get Huntington's onto that national list.
That is the #1 priority. Getting it included in the NPRD 2021 would unlock that crucial financial aid. They're also calling for multidisciplinary care centers that can provide integrated neurology, psychiatry, and palliative care in one place. Without that policy change, any hope for a better quality of life for these families remains completely out of reach.
Thank you for listening. If you want to provide suggestions, please contact on the Twitter handle given in the episode description. As always, we are eager to hear what our listeners want to be informed about. We wish you a great day.